So, if you take a pack of frozen breakfast sausage links and you put it into your freezer and then you turn off the power in your house for about 3 or 4 months, what happens to that package of sausage links? This is a question that I can answer because for about 3 years during college, my summer job was to clean out foreclosed homes. And these were places that people had left often at a moment's notice, taking whatever they wanted to keep and everything else they left behind, like packages of frozen sausage links in unrefrigerated freezers. And I can tell you that when you open that freezer and you find that pack of sausage links, it will, by all appearances, still be a pack of frozen sausage links, except what you're really looking at is a thin veneer of moist packaging that encases what has become a cheesecake of putrefied sausage remnants. And you won't know it until you reach out and try to grab that box. So we found a lot of nasty stuff in these houses, but nasty stuff wasn't the only thing we found. We also, there were kind of, like, I'd say 3 categories of stuff we found. We found certainly nasty stuff. We found a lot of sad stuff. And we also found some cool stuff. The coolest stuff we found was in the house of a drug dealer who was incarcerated at the time. And when I say drug dealer, I don't want you guys to picture Jesse Pinkman. I want you to picture, like, the dude. And this guy had this amazing record collection of LPs from the 60s and 70s, all originals, and we were either going to throw this stuff away or keep it. So I ended up inheriting a record collection from the dude, and I still have it. So that was cool. That's the first category. We also, did find a lot of sad stuff, and the sad stuff more often than not had to do with kids. There was one house where we found a bunch of seemingly unread parenting books and pacifiers, baby toys scattered around. And we learned from the neighbor that day that the family had been foreclosed upon not long after the father and husband decided to shack up with some waitress down in Georgia. And that was the house where I learned that in many cases, lost houses are preceded by lost households. And incidentally, that was also the house where I found the nastiest thing that I would ever encounter in all of my travels. And that's the third and most populous category of stuff we found, by the way. Nasty stuff. So in the back of this house there was a shed. In the shed there was a standalone freezer unit, just a big tall freezer. And this thing had been powered down for several months, like many of the fridges and freezers, but fortunately in this case it had been turned back on, the power was on, so the whole thing was frozen back over, rotten as it may have been, and completely frosted over inside, but not so frosted over as to obscure what occupied the second shelf of that freezer. What we found there was the complete severed head of a black bear. And it wasn't just the bear's head that filled this freezer, because all along the shelves on the door and the shelves above and below the head, there were all these Ziploc bags that were hand-labeled with Sharpie, and they just said, "Steak, 2002. This was the summer of 2005. So the thing was frozen, and so if you were lucky in that regard, the plan was, this is the end of the day Thursday, the plan was Friday, we're going to finish the job, we're going to keep this thing plugged in, for God's sake. And when we're finally done, we're going to wrap this thing up as quickly as we can, load it onto the truck, and then we're going to load it onto the trailer, go straight to the lot where we keep our big industrial dumpster, get it in there before the thing thaws out. I was lucky because Friday, that was the next day, I was assigned to a different house, so I wasn't even going to have to do this. And I showed up feeling like a pretty lucky guy on Monday morning, expecting to find an empty trailer and a loaded dumpster, except what I found was an empty trailer, all except for the freezer. Apparently, like, the geniuses that I worked with thought it would be a good idea to save this job for Monday morning. So, and this was a sweltering summer weekend. So this thing had all weekend to thaw out, and from across the lot you could smell that distinct odor of 3-year-old bear meat. So our job was to load this thing into this like 7-foot high dumpster. So we took off our gloves, counterintuitively. These were like heavy-duty work gloves. We took them off because we couldn't like contaminate these things. We had a whole day's work ahead of us. So we took off our gloves and took our bare hands, naked hands, and then placed them up on this sun-heated freezer and lifted it up out of the trailer and carried it down the little ramp and up to the dumpster. And as we began to lift this thing, we realized how heavy it was, because like a standalone freezer is pretty heavy. You add the complete biomass of a decomposed black bear, and you've got like a really heavy object that you're trying to lift. So I was positioned right at the base of this freezer. And this was like, not just like lift with your knees heavy, it was like, oh my God, I hope this thing doesn't fall back and crush me to death heavy. And I'm lifting this thing, and we're just beginning to clear the precipice there and just about to tip it over into the dumpster, and it's like maximum strain at this point. And just as we tilt it, the tilting motion causes these streams of black gelatinous liquid to start running down both of my arms. And there's nothing I can do to wipe it off or swat it away. It's the most disgusting smell, the most disgusting sensation I've ever experienced. So, and all I can do is hold this thing and just hope it doesn't fall on me. So finally, we push it up over the edge. It drops in. Myself and the three guys that were doing this, I mean, we scream like little girls and run to the other end of the lot. And there's a chain link fence and a bunch of weeds and stuff, and we just start ripping weeds out of the ground and clods of dirt and handfuls of gravel, just like scraping at ourselves to get this filth off of us. Somebody has a bottle of Purell, and we're just like all over our arms, just like anything we could do to get the smell off, which we couldn't get it off for the rest of the day. But fortunately, our gloves were still clean, so, which is good, because we had a whole day's work ahead of us. We had a whole summer's work ahead of us. I worked, that was my first summer on this job, and I did it 3 more years after that, and I never thought about quitting, because that was the best job I'd ever had at the time. And to this day, it's one of the best jobs I've ever had, because it taught me more than any other job about life. It taught me that life can be very often nasty, all too often sad, but sometimes it can still be kind of cool.